I love collaborative storytelling. I love being able to weave everybody's stories into a consistent narrative. I love getting to interact with other people who've had different experiences and bring their own stories into the greater milieu.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, the podcast where I delve into the minds of tabletop gaming creatives. Join me as I uncover their creative process and inspirations. You are in the right place if you enjoy listening to thoughtful interviews with creative people.
I'm Allison Arth, and when I'm not busy disagreeing with Craig Shipman about his feelings on Billy Joel's songwriting capabilities, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. My guests today are Patrice Long and Leland Anderchek. Pat has a background in biology and is a self-taught artist emphasizing realism and black and white art. When not working on Diesel Shot, she creates stock art packs available in Diesel Shot's store for people to have high-quality, non-generative AI art for their own projects. Pat, welcome to the third floor.
Thank you so much for having me.
So my other guest is Leland. Leland is a lifelong game designer and creator of Acrodiesel Age. He enjoys muttering about game design and coming up with new world-building ideas. He is a rapscallion streamer, writer who flits between freelance work and quote-unquote finishing Change Stars. So Leland, welcome to the third floor.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am going to subject the two of you to the same dumb question you get on every single podcast you've been on. It's going to be about your origin story, and we'll start with you, Pat, but I want to kind of frame it a little bit different. So, Pat, at one point, you knew nothing about RPGs, knew nothing about taking a sheet of paper, pretending to be somebody else and rolling dice, and it was put in front of you for the very first time. Can you take me back there?
Yeah, so actually, I kind of chose to put it in front of me myself, rather randomly. As a child, I would often try to escape my silly little house life by riding my bike to Borders and finding a nice book to read every now and then. And eventually, I got enamored with the art on the covers and inside the books of these tabletop role-playing games. And I kind of grew obsessed with sitting in the aisles of Borders, popping open the monster manual and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and not just D&D. I also popped open, the World of Darkness books.
Oh, yeah.
That had some really gorgeous art, Traveler. I was obsessed with these worlds that were built inside of these books and the beautiful art that illustrated them. And that's really how I found my appreciation and love for tabletop role-playing games. It wasn't for many years before I actually played it with a group, but I was just enamored with the books.
So I think, Pat, it's interesting because I hear that a good bit. And to a certain degree, that was my story too, right? Where I was looking at I was into fantasy novels and stuff like that. And I kept getting drawn to this beautiful art. My big question though is you're sitting there in Borders flipping through these books. Did you get a sense of what the hell you were looking at other than you liked what you looked at? Could you understand what these things were?
At first, not really. But looking at the art made me want to read more. And I really liked the world building in all of them. So, one of the things that drew me in, obviously, was the art. But then I got really into the Drow. I read all of the R.A. Salvatore
Why?
books.
What was it about Drow that got you pulled in?
I don't know. I loved, honestly, the Underdark and the novel society that they presented there. It was so different from, the other stuff I was seeing in fantasy media and from, pretty much everything that I could have expected.
Sure.
And just the Underdark itself is such a beautiful ecology. I love the innovative thinking that spawned this vast underground ecology full of monsters that were either naturally there or created by magic and interference from gods, and the polities that form in this hostile place and how they interact with one another. It's all very cool, and I love the Drow. They're just delightful matriarchal evil latex clad ladies. I see myself.
What's interesting as I hear you talk about this, I don't think I've ever realized it, and somebody will call me on this and say, Craig, you couldn't be more wrong. But I feel like the Drow were really kind of the first uniquely fleshed out ancestry that we saw in D&D. Everything else was somewhat generic, stuff we've all seen before. But boy, they created, the politics, the culture and everything of the Drow. And I feel like that was one of the first times we saw that. But my memory is for shit, so I could be wrong. But I can see how that would suck you in completely. Now, you alluded, Pat, that at some point it was time later. When you actually got a chance to play. So let's fast forward there. How old are you and how did you get that opportunity?
I think I was kind of towards the end of middle school or early high school. And I was kind of socially awkward, if you couldn't guess from the whole... My social life consisted of sitting in the aisles of Borders looking at books.
If we lived in the same town, we would have been staring at each other because I did the same
thing. For sure. And so my mom was like, all right, you constantly talk about D&D. You're constantly looking at these books. There are actual social clubs of people who play these games who would be willing to interact with you. So let me just scoot you into one of those. So she took me to one of those gaming groups that are organized in gaming stores. Mm-hmm. And it was an established group that kind of had their own had a cliquey kind of vibe.
Game culture and the whole thing, yeah.
Yeah, they had their own culture. Yep. I mean, in fairness, I was just a little twerp who showed up and I was like, I want to play D&D.
And I want to be a Drow.
They were already an established friend group, so it was like, didn't end up working out.
Actually, a very particular gnome who there will be homage to later. Because you didn't show up and say you wanted to play a Drow, you played a gnome.
Yes, they wouldn't let me play a Drow. Because Drow are... Oh, it was a D&D too, so I had there was already a learning curve.
Yep.
I grew up looking at the 3.5 books, or 3.0. So I had to learn AD&D, and then I wanted to play a Drow, but they were like, no, you can't. They're evil. You're not allowed to start with them. Yep. And I'm like, all right, what about a Sverneblin? They were like, okay, sure.
So
they killed me off in the first session.
It's so funny, Pat, because I hear that story more than once too, which is you have a new person that sits down at one of these tables and the table kills them. Which I like, there's an entire world out there that I just have never been exposed to. So there is a multiverse, Pat, where after that terrible experience, you never play again, and nobody would argue on that choice. So how did you end up? How thick was that gravity, or how strong was that gravity to pull you back in again? And when did that happen?
Yeah. So I didn't immediately join another group after that. Yeah. It definitely took me some time. When I went off to college, actually, is when I really started to reach out to people playing TTRPGs again. And my kind of hyper nerdy, socially awkward friend group arranged a D&D game. And by the end of the, I guess their senior year was my junior year or whatever. Mm-hmm. But whatever. By the end of it all, we were playing a pretty consistent campaign. And it ended because they left. And I got invited to another campaign with some kind of mutual friends. And from there, that actually became a campaign that I stayed in for 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're a little bit older now. Looking back at that, right? We could say this is when this hobby really got its hooks into you, right? But you're a little bit older now looking back on it. Why? So what was it? We got an idea of why you loved the books. We got an idea of why you didn't give up on it. But years later now, looking back, what happened in those campaigns in college that made it all click for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. Getting to live in someone else's shoes, getting to experience a world through the viewpoint of a created character, kind of to have more control over how I, chose to be in this world, and, having the ability to collaborate with friends and create these shared, imagination scapes. really, captivating. It's kind of, addictive. You can't really get away with it once you've had your fix.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And you may not be able to remember this, Pat, but do you remember the moment when you knew this group was going to be different than what you encountered in high school?
Well, I mean, they invited me.
That's something, right? You weren't. Your mom didn't drop you off, right?
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm wondering is, was there a time, like maybe after the first session or so, that you realized, this is not what I encountered before. I want to come back to this. Did that happen, or was it just so natural you didn't even think about it?
I think it was natural, but I think now would be a cool time to do a little tirade if you're willing to entertain me.
I'll put a quarter in. Let's play.
Yeah. This was also my first time getting to play as a female character.
Oh, wow.
Too. They were so I'm trans. And as soon as I saw the group composition, I don't know why my head was like, everybody's playing a boy, I should play a girl.
Amazing.
For diversity's sake.
Sure.
Right? And kind of sticks. I think there's a reason I played that game for another 7 years.
That's really neat. And it's funny, I have several trans people that have been on the show and friends here locally. That is also not unique. It's amazing how it has given an opportunity to allow people to explore those types of things in a very safe place with safe friends. I think it's one of the cooler things about it, regardless of whether that exploration leads to decisions or not, right? It allows, I enjoy being able to role play people that are not like me, and it allows me to explore parts of me that I don't get to explore in my normal life. That's pretty damn cool. What was the next big game though? Everything we've been talking about is D&D. So what was the next big game that you got a chance to play that said, "Oh wow, there's a lot more games out here"?
Yes, sorry. I didn't mean to be so one track about D&D. I hardly even play it anymore these days. There's so many games.
Sure.
It just, the culture's so it's so pervasive in the gaming culture. Yep. It's kind of everybody's played it once. What was next? Because it was with the next game that
Stars Without Number. We do a Stars Without Number one shot. Where you
that's
call
a jump.
A cable car error call 5. Well, I guess this is a vast dive into game design discussions and my opinions on K-Daddy, Crawdaddy, Crawford, but you had the same 6 stats. You had hit points, You had ACs, you had HPs, and I was like, that's your hit, 2 hit. If you roll a save, roll this, and roll 20 basically if you have to roll a save in that system and your level is inputted correctly in your stats, you click a button and it's done.
Right.
And it will tell you if it passed or failed. So it's a jump in a sense thematically, but you were interested in sci-fi. I would say the next game transformatively that we move into with Alien Summer is Alien RPG, which I think also relates to some of your origin story. But allow me to step back and let that.
Thank you so much, my little genie in a bottle here. So the next game that I played after all that D&D was another D&D game that led me to this little bastard. And then after I met Lee, who was, far more well-versed in the true diversity of the tabletop culture, after I met Lee and started working with him, we played everything.
Nice.
Yeah. It's great.
What do you when you think about everything? What were some games or some systems specifically that had that really punched you in the face, that really made you stop and think of what's possible?
Oh, for sure. As far as what's possible, I think Rifts is probably one of the ones. I actually played it on Garblog Games first, but it was just such a trip. So it's such a departure from the world building that I was accustomed to in D&D and even, Stars Without Numbers and such. But I think the one that's truly captivated me the most has been Alien RPG.
Why?
Or Mothership.
Okay.
I'm not sure which I like better.
Sure. But why? Why are those? Why did those really get their hooks in you? What's about those that's so transformative?
Well, confess some of it's the genre.
Sure.
I love sci-fi, especially hard sci-fi, that kind of dystopian, the company rules everything kind of concept. It just, I don't know exactly what it is about the genre, but it's got its hooks deep into my skin. Like I'm a Cenobite, and the pins are just sci-fi.
Yeah.
Various,
But more than that, think about the origin story of the property itself with Alien.
Well, I love Alien. that shit traumatized me as a kid perfectly.
Yeah.
She didn't have a TV at the time, and she saw it in a hotel room,
wow.
insulated from other visual media to a great degree, right?
Yeah.
And then that happens, and I think you can see it. Personally, I think you can see the art.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting. That's great. All right, Leland, it is your time in the chair, my friend. Same question. At one point, you knew nothing about tabletop role-playing games, and it was put in front of you for the first time.
Yeah, I think, I guess by the time I saw the light, I was already a role-playing game man, in a sense, because I don't know I unironically don't know what comes first, but I think that one of the, as I'm racing back here in the memory archives, as like a child, for like learning to count, I was given like a vast array of little colored plastic bears. They all had a color assigned to them, and they had different sizes. This pretty naturally flowed into my brother and I playing what we call the bear games, which involved all sorts of imaginary situations and blocks and Lincoln logs about like World War scenarios and like role playing, and it was completely dice free, entirely like his refereeing, and eventually he grew out of it. And I suppose the short answer there is that I did not.
Yeah.
But the ideas captivated me, and I missed it. And I think the first time I was aware of these formalized role playing games' existence was the Dexter's Lab episode where they're playing it. I'm not even kidding. I think a cartoon showed me that they existed. And I found it interesting, but I don't think I had a word for it, because they didn't invite the legal wrath of WotC, right? Or whoever owned it at the time. But I was like aware of it. And then my friend's dad had played it in college, and we would do like imaginary games, but it was very much still like, well, and then I do this and you do this and we do that. Like there was no formalization. We did almost play like a pseudo game of D&D. I don't know how it really worked, but he had some of his dad's old character sheets from college, and he ran me through this dungeon. It was pretty fun. I don't know where we draw the line, because I like outside of this recollection, I wouldn't peg this as my first role playing game.
So what would
I try to get into. Well, it gets to college, because here's the thing: I can't get enough people who are interested through the younger years, and I try to go to play by post online. It turns out my temperament is not well disposed to play by post, but also most of those are freeform anyway. And if you are playing with the system, it's usually best to avoid, let's say, one with a lot of back and forth calculations, due to the nature of play by post basically being like a correspondence share letter. Tools like Discord and the like have helped speed that up. But I remember, and I don't know if I know that the name is incredibly toxic, and I'm not even sure what the person did. But the first time I cracked into a tabletop role-playing game that was at all like D&D was Adventure, Conquer a King. And I was reading this intro section, and it defined what armor class was. And my stupid high school child brain bounced off of it.
Oh, wow, really?
I reread it, and I couldn't grasp the concept, and I stopped reading the book. I could not read D&D. I could not learn role-playing games from books. I was simply I write them. Reminder, I am constantly designing role-playing games. I have libraries of role-playing games that I have written in my drive. And even before then, I was trying to write games, and I'd have problems like, okay, I've ascribed these statistics to these characters because there's a video gamer, right?
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, but like, how do I actually proceed to the next thing? Because I could not uniquely perceive of... And I had played games like Neverwinter Nights and stuff, which came really close. Yep. I could not uniquely conceive of initiative order. I could not uniquely conceive of taking turns. I had played board games with turn taking. I couldn't think of it. And then I'm totally out of my league. And not until I try and play a game of Fate with my friends and my fellow designer who made the Change Stars EP call my freshman year of college. It falls apart entirely. It's part of the reason why I say I firmly believe it is incorrect to advise Fate as an introductory game. It is not an appropriate introduction for first-time role-playing gamers unless the person running it is an experienced runner of Fate, in which case it could be lovely. And then finally, I get into a 3.5 game in my second year of college after I transfer. And it was like I was a kid given a Christmas treat. I played a drow rogue. I hadn't even read the books, but he was basically Drizzt. He was chaotic good, even though it was an evil campaign. Reza Shako Sulika. And I had figured out his name and I had the whole voice. And like, it dampened my voice growth as a DM because people got so annoyed they made me stop. They were like, shut up. And I was like, all right, gosh, all right. Sorry. I'm sorry that I'm not going to roast Madeline right now, but I'm sorry your Illithid talks just like you do, Madeline.
So I want to go back to the reading piece real quick if we can, Leland, which is you mentioned that you struggled with that. Now, was that a situation where the medium is a struggle? So do you in general have a hard time maybe reading from print to concept, or is it just you had to see the mechanics in play in order for you to be able to digest them? Does that make sense?
I think it leans latter. I'm not necessarily like a sit down and read person always, but for example, I taught myself the first about third of my introductory computer science course that I took there just because someone gave me the book and I sat down and I typed up some Python. So if something's been written out, which is part of why I have strong feelings about the flow, I don't think I've reached it, but like the flow of layout design and the flow of visual presentation is so key to concepts clicking. Because yes, absolutely, I learned everything I learned about D&D by playing it at a table.
Right.
I have never given Wizards of the Coast a fucking penny. And I learned 5e by opening the online SRD, having the Roll20 up, and believing my players when they told me things and getting backseat DM'd by someone who knew. Yeah. I have entirely, I do not read their books and I do not care. I run, you know what I mean? So like, I'm a learn by doing guy. Yeah. But also there is great value in books and how we present them. And a lot of the old school style of like, here is this, absorb. And even like, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but sometimes the shortest way to write something is confounding. How so? Sometimes you are using a cachet of knowledge. Because here's the reality. I'm not going to rename the game, but let's say that you're writing an OSR game, right? Mm-hmm. And you use AC. So some of them won't even define it, but if you define it, right, you're probably going to do the shortest, simplest sentence because you're like, everyone who's playing this game already knows what this is. Yep. Side note, that isn't true, but there is these assumptions about things like hit points or initiative or like preceding initiative order. It's like, okay, but like, what does that mean? You are going off of so many assumptions. It's like when you try and talk to somebody who's never played a video game or a tabletop game about these basic concepts and they're like, character creation? ? What even is that? Yep. So I think that when you use a lot of words and you unpack concepts, you can do a lot. You also overwhelm people by volume of text, though. Mm-hmm. And I bounced off of a heavy text, so I'm in both camps, weirdly.
You have strong feelings about this. You had a bad encounter, right? The inability to digest that. What was the first book you didn't write that did it right? That you went, oh, look, it can be done the right way. Do you remember what was the first time you came across that?
That is a brilliant phrase, by the way. Can we coin that? Can I get that on a shirt? What's the that you didn't write that did it right? So this is going to be kind of a mixed answer, but I have the book somewhere physically around here. I don't. Doing that? It's a vision. It's an auditory medium. I'll show you later, Craig. So, Space 1889.
Ooh, interesting.
The original, none of the ports. The original. For reasons that are perhaps for another podcast, my dad was doing some business with some game design people in the 90s involving certain video games. And like as a side note to that, one of his pals, who was also in historical reenactment, historical war games, brought over a number of them. Almost all of them were minis games that I would like glance at and find interesting and enjoy the art, but didn't technically get into. But one of them was Space 1889, which makes a lot of sense if you think about its legacy and its lineage. Mm-hmm. Because in so many ways, Space 1889 is like delightful and arresting. There's a little picture and a column. Side note, right? Like it depicts an era of colonialism, and I thought it was doing so critically. And that's how me and my friends played the game. Right. I've only read the original book. I know there's a billion audiobooks and texts, and maybe the guy who made it's lovely. Maybe the guy who made it's not. I do not know. But the book, the cogent point is, right? It read somewhat like a history book, which I love. I love history. But it also brought you through with sort of like reasoning, in part because it was written for someone. It was written for war gamers,
right,
which is we're going to get to here. But it was not written for someone who was assumed to be a role-playing gamer. It was not. So a lot of things, they really kind of spent like more time on it, more pages. They presented and framed it differently, and they really like rounded out the description. And things like even the careers, rather than like a table I don't understand for a class, it was like, oh, and you have a number of careers. Here's a lovely little picture of someone being a spy master or a dilettante lady or a marine or an officer or an inventor. And I see it gives plus this, here's your money. And I'm like, okay, I understand money. Side note, it uses like British pounds and sterlings and pardons. I never learned that actually. Economy gets thrown out of whack soon. Ironically, so the combat is the thing that's based almost, it's basically like they're beefed up minis.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're basically hero units. And like part of the reason it was so fluid and easy to introduce like NPCs is virtually everyone was one wound. And if you were a lieutenant or someone else notable, you get 2 wounds. I think there was some condition for 3 wounds, but it was like, for the most part, it's like they roll this, and you don't even have to think about it. They take a hit, they're kaput.
Yep.
The combat rules were so like arcane and ill fit for the purposes that one winter break, I completely rewrote them for my friends, mapping them such that I changed no statistic of any weapon, which kind of answers but doesn't the question, because like Space 89 does a lot of it right,
yep,
but it's an older game. It suffers from some of those complications, and ultimately I didn't like the combat section didn't do it super fluidly. I would say, what's the first one that I read? I'm trying to go back.
Well, I want to pause here for a second, Leland, because this is important, I think, which is there's other people that would see a problem with 1889 and go, you know what, let's find something else, right? Let's put this down. This is not really exactly what we need. Let's do something else. That's not what you did. What you did is lifted the hood, tore out all the wires, and put them back in again. Why?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you just move on?
And this is I have an abortive attempt at a VTM campaign. It doesn't work out for a few reasons that are more complicated interpersonal. And 1889 is an important social thing for me. I think is the best way to leave it at. It's a really important social event, and I want to have fun with my friends, and everyone's enjoying their character and having fun in every other portion of the game. By the way, I don't know what an encounter is at this point in time,
right?
So I don't conceive of the world in encounters. It's like I have a whiteboard behind me, and I can jack into a projector because we're in college, and like I'm in some computer science classroom we're hijacking, and like if we go to a new city that's on the map, I just draw it, invent a weird system of government, and do a quick MS painting that, like, as long as the canals link up with the rest of the map, it works. Yeah. And because again, there's like supplemental material that fills out all these places. I was not, trust me, my canon very quickly diverged. I think it was just because we had momentum. We were playing a game, we were having fun, and I enjoyed the challenge. I had always enjoyed designing games that hadn't worked and hadn't gotten played. Why not design on one that was working, getting played? And wow, if you take that out of context and remix it, it sounds like a really depressing endorsement of infinite 5e third-party content production, doesn't it?
Well, so here's the thing, Leland. So you rewire it, right? You remap things, you do some design work, you bring it back to this table that's obviously very important to you. What was their reaction?
They really liked it, and I had been running it by one member previously mentioned for roasting her illithid voice. I'm so sorry, Madeline. Do leave it in, though. Do leave it in. I think she'll enjoy it. Basically, I was like, hey, here's this, that, and the other. And I'm like, does that seem like too much? Because I've overcomplicated some stuff. Sure. Like there's armor degradation now. That sort of a thing. And she's like, yeah. It's working. And so I run through some simulated combats and like it's Gmail, my god, those halcyon days. But for whatever reason, I get a test and then it gets to the table and people are liking it. And frankly, like a lot of the fight stuff was like looking at me as if though I were a Roman augur of bone and organ anyway. So I was just like, Like I was doing some loose interpreting at some point with the combat, which is part of why I was like, and I had this advantage that I have, this home field advantage where I design it and I kind of know it like the back of my hand. Yep. Side note, Leland will misquote his own game's rules somewhere on this podcast.
That's how you become a designer.
Yeah. But just because like I have this confidence, it's like the same reason that I almost always create unique worlds, which I hadn't done in that instance. Although we made it our own in many ways. So yeah, I definitely think it was stick with it. And people, to actually answer your question, sorry, you're
doing great.
They loved it. They really liked it. We love that campaign. Combat wasn't the only reason we liked that campaign. It wasn't even a primary reason we liked that campaign, but we would fluidly flow into it. We had one character who infamously could take no hits and was constantly on the verge of death because of how the stat allocation determined your wounds, right? And you are just a jacked up tabletop mini at the war game mini at the end of the day. So our crazy scientist who was super frail, and then we had one character who was she was more the suave lady adventurer, although eventually they do get like steampunk power armor suits, and that totally changed the dynamic. And they have one guy who's literally, he thought Madeline got two of the players to come to this 3-player PC game by telling them there were more players at the beginning. They did not wind up staying through by telling them it was a one shot. So one of them made a super weak inventor, and the other named his character Damien Notwain, who is literally just Space 89 Batman.
Sure.
And he was always sneaking around beating people up, and maybe someone had to pull out a revolver or a saber or something, but combat honestly just didn't last that long, and there was so much utility and speed that I don't necessarily think this is a ringing endorsement of oh Lee, you made the combat system so much better, so much as Lee, we're getting onto the things that we like, which were just running about and having a good time. Really. So
we go down the trail, we look at the signposts as we go. Leland, what's the next big game for you? So we've got a sense now of the impact 1889 had on you. It really got the creative designer juices going. What's the next big game?
What's the next big game?
Warhammer, absolutely. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition.
Why?
Third, because entirely, I'm not making this up. There's a website called Silver Ghost or something, and if you go there, you can fully generate an entire character. Like at the click of a button, and it'll either do it random or you can select things like gender, and you'll have to make some choices like, hey, which of these talents do you want? And I find it and I love it, and I pitch my friends on it, and nobody at the time is really into the Warhammer universe or knows anything about it. I know I'm vaguely familiar at this point with 40K.
Sure.
I know pretty much nothing about fantasy at the time. But it's just something to spice up with one-shots once in a while. And then we eventually play a game called Buddy the Ice Queen, which isn't even set in the Warhammer universe. It's its own thing. And yeah, it was a really fun game. It was sort of what transitioned us to the online universe of playing on Roll20, because I mentioned it to some college friends, like, why don't we just do that? And so that was what sort of kept things going past the point of us leaving college, right? Because I still play with that game today, and I have invented Pat into the group. Yeah, and we've had some additions over the years. So it's been a lovely run. And the next big game is absolutely Warhammer. It starts my love of D100 systems. The brutal critical system is something that I love, and I'm always trying to put into games in some way. You can find some of that in Change Stars. And I find myself fascinated with the idea of a system that is not about making heroes or like gentlemen adventurers and their hangers on, but people. You know what I mean? Bakers, galores, carriagemen, and because we were getting randomized careers for all of these characters, we were very rarely was there like a caster or something. Right. You were usually something peasantish to martial. Someone once hopped off of a wagon in the midst of like a zombie apocalypse situation, like baked a lovely bread and came back with it. And we were always finding ways to use the skills, even if they made literally no sense. Great. Yeah, and it was also an introduction to, I think that sometimes a designer can come to D&D first, and an idea is implanted in their brain that all damage variance comes from different polyhedrals. I didn't have that in 89. It was numbers of D6s. Yeah. But in Warhammer, it's also not varied. It's only D10s. It is entirely what are the weapon properties and a D5, because you have to divide when you use the dagger. But it starts like a real interest in it for me, because And the idea of like a hand weapon, it's like, oh, it's an axe or something. This is also a wargaming artifact. This is also because they're trying to map it onto the war game. Yep. And I think that my own approach coming at from war games as someone who gets more into the board games and stuff and video games before reaching role playing makes a lot of sense. They clicked more for me. But yeah, I think it was foundational to my love of D100s. My freshman outing, Ackroyd Diesel Age RPG, which is quite the mess, is a D100 game. Right. I do wind up taking the idea of the variable damage dice, but I also really love the idea of properly distinguishing weapons via properties. One of the most disappointing things about Dungeons and Dragons when I finally got to it was I was like, there's like 12 weapons? For real? And I was so disappointed. Yeah. So,
and what's neat about that, Leland, is that for some people that's disappointing, right? And for other people, they're like, there's too many. Right. And that's what's great. What's great is that we've got games for all of those people, which I think is pretty cool. There are games
for all those people. Yep. And as you can see with 1889, if it's not the game for you quite yet and you're willing and everyone's wanting to entertain you, maybe you can pop off the hood and like rewire some things. I mean, I will tell this story briefly, but I once encountered this lovely individual and she explained that they quite enjoyed playing Vampire in her group. And I was like, I was getting to know him because like it was a mutual interest role playing game. So I was like, oh, that's lovely. So what do you play Requiem or do you play Masquerade? You know, I favor Masquerade's lore, but I know some people backport Requiem's rules. I'm butchering the word. I digress. She explains, actually, my group only plays GURPS. We read these books, we take the lore, and then we play literally everything in GURPS. Yep. It's such a simpler system, and we all already know it, which I think is very much a transcendent statement, right? Because people will say that about 5e and then say it's inherent in 5e's design. But she's talking about GURPS. Yep. And I know many people who defend GURPS as a very easy and fun and fast game to learn. And I am not here to say that they are wrong. But I think that the plurality of gamers would disagree with the assertion that GURPS is easy to do. Which it's designed to be a general role-playing game, but...
Yeah, GURPS, I was a big GURPS guy when I was younger. Yeah. And the thing about GURPS, and we're like... When two people are arguing about GURPS, they're not talking about the same game. Because the one thing that's key about GURPS is it's modular, right? You can make it the simplest 3-die role-playing game that's ever been created and never get into all the other stuff. Or you can take those Lego pieces from that part of the book. And it's something that I give Steve Jackson a ton of credit for because he created a pretty incredible modular thing. But I get a kick out of it when some people are like, oh, it's so, GURPS is so complicated. And the next person like, no, GURPS is super easy. They're not talking about the same game in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. They showed up as the pipsqueak to some game where someone was running 12 books, you know what I mean? Probably from far ends of the product's lifeline.
Yeah, very true. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. We're going to do that with Lee and Pat on the other side of this break. We need to understand what the hell Change Stars is. We'll be right back.
This is Sean. You may have heard of me from such movies as Brett and Sean Go to Illinois, 2 Motorcycles, 1 Stick of Dynamite, and Gaming and BS. What kind of RPG podcast is that? After my NFTs were stolen, I decided to become a patron of Third Floor Wars. The content is great and it costs me less than a good shot of liquor. So consider becoming a patron. It may just land you your next big role. Head over to patreon.com/Third Floor Wars. Tell Craig Sean sent ya.
So I think before we launch into this, I'm going to read a little bit of the blurb for Change Stars. Change Stars is a sci-fi RPG set in a bright yet perilous future. Inspired by utopian feminist science fiction and contemporary gritty speculative futures, Change Stars presents a modern take on a post-patriarchal society. A diverse array of frames provides opportunities for many sorts of play, ranging from taking on ranging from taking on xenomorphic separatists, cutthroat criminals, lethal machines, and otherworldly predators, to forwarding scientific advancements across space, to working a day in the life of your character as unexpected calamity thrusts them into a thriller. Good God, that's a lot of stuff. So let's take for let's
I
pause
overtacked that copy, didn't I?
No, it's good. It's good. It gives you pack a lot of flavor into one paragraph. But what I want to do is, there was the first day that we saw the acorn that eventually grew into change stars. I want to go to the day before we find that acorn. So where was the initial itch that eventually got scratched and eventually turned into where we are today? Can you both remember what that was?
We can't. We've told the story multiple times.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward.
It's very straightforward.
You want to take it? All right, should I?
Yeah, I'll take it. Sure. But also I wanted to make one tiny addendum. It's xenophobic separatists.
Oh.
The xenomorphic separatists. Totally different.
I'm sure there may be xenomorphic separatists as well who are engaged in interesting new changes.
Yeah, they're
Thank
just
you.
not on the same side, probably.
I overstuffed that slug, man. It's
Alien separatists is still kind of interesting, right? They can face
absolutely.
There are
huggers and
those too.
Ooh.
that's really
Little
funny
bit of
that I misread
everything.
that. Thank you for that. All right.
No, you're good.
Back to the
It's a
original
kitchen
question. Take me to the day before we started knowing this was going to become a game.
All right, so Lee has mentioned that I was inducted into an existing gaming group, the one in which the oft-mentioned Madeline is a participant. And I am obsessed with Alien, the franchise, and I heard that there's a sick new game that just dropped called Alien RPG, and I get my hands on a copy, I look inside, I'm obsessed with the art, I love the lore, I love that they've done all these sorts of things. I think I've even at this point played it once or twice, or maybe, I'm not sure. But I was so enthusiastic to play this with anybody who would be willing.
Yep.
And so I brought it to this group because, we take turns GMing as, as we're wont to do.
Sure.
And I'm like, hey guys, can we play Alien RPG? And they were like, not really a fan of the Alien franchise. I've never even seen the films. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like maybe, but I don't know. I'm kind of scared by the xenomorphs and stuff. It's like there were a variety of responses to it, but all of them were a tepid,
Sure.
maybe not. And so I got creative. I decided, all right, well, I really want to play this game, and I need experience GMing it so that I can terrify some other group. But you're gonna play this system, and I'll invent an entirely new world for
Very
it.
nice.
And so I put out a series of polls in our group chat, focusing on different aspects of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Lee, do you remember them offhand?
I remember that one of them was what is the nature of what's the political organization of how many unique species are there, and what's the general political mode, and we had different options, and this is quite literally how we wind up with the Trinity. And originally it's we were playing into themes of matriarchy and stuff, throwing back to the drow, harder, and then when we realized we're gonna refine the setting and put it out, we changed it to something which is I would say overall more egalitarian but still has its own issues.
But yeah, no, so I basically put out a series of polls, and the group voted on certain aspects, and I worked all those aspects into a consistent narrative, and that's how we came about.
How hard was that to do? I mean, going from polls and 40% this, 30% that to a living, breathing world. That you glossed over that. That couldn't have been easy.
That was the best part. That was the funnest part. I got to figure out how all these discongruous, aspects fit together in their own unique ways. I got to, mesh the gears with each other and, create government systems. I think one of the fun things about the poll was the answer, humanity is governed by an AI, tied with humanity as part of a union of aliens that formed under. I think
like Federation style or something to that effect was used.
Federation of aliens versus humanity is governed by an AI, and those were the ones that tied together as opposed to all the other poll options. So I had to make both of those true.
Much like the warp in the West with the end of Daggerfall, we made both endings true.
So here's a question for you then, Pat, which is where do you think the skill set it took to do that came from? Right? I mean, this is a pretty unique thing that you did, and it sounds like it was the first time you really did it, at least did it this way. Why? Why were you able to do that? Does that question make sense?
Yes, no, that absolutely does make sense. And in addition to what we've already talked about, how I grew up reading world building and obsessed with the unique novel alien cultures of the Drow and other books that depict, rather divergent from human history cultures. Another thing that I haven't mentioned yet is I also participated in a kind of a sci-fi Lego role building game.
Interesting.
For a while. Basically, there was it was in a forum called Eurobricks. One of the people who worked on Change Stars is actually an old friend of mine from that. Nice. Luke.
Shout out Luke.
Shout out to Luke. I was already involved in a community that was dedicated to building its own novel world. And I was a very active participant in trying to create the spirit of the game and bring it bring out all these different world building elements and incorporate other people's stories into my own story. I had a fanciful villain character in that. Mm-hmm. And she was this evil behind the scenes micromanager type for a megacorp. And I fancied myself the villain of everybody else's stories, so I had to be deeply involved in everybody else's stories so that I could figure out where she fell in them.
So it's obvious, Pat, how much you enjoyed this aspect of it.
Yes, I love world.
Where's the joy? So where does all of this enthusiasm and love come from? Why do you like this piece so much?
I love collaborative storytelling. Mm-hmm. I love being able to weave everybody's stories into a consistent narrative. I love getting to interact with other people who've had different experiences and bring their own stories into the greater milieu. And I love the interaction. I love the collaborative building. I love feeling like, we're building something together and, creating a new story, a new world in which we can all, insert ourselves.
She's quite the weaver. Sometimes you wake up and realize she's taken some of your thread because actually we had an abortive Stars Without Number campaign that didn't happen, in which there was a species called the Keth, and I wake up one day and Pat has added them as like a still around precursor to the Changed Stars lore.
Very nice.
And the thing is, they're like very heavily precog psychics. Guess what isn't in the Changed Stars hard sci-fi setting? Psychic powers. So we then have the fun collaborative job of figuring out what the fuck is going on here.
Sure. Now, Leland, are you on the other side of the GM screen at this point? Did you play in this game?
I played in this game. Did I help make some? Because in that era in particular, I would help make maps sometimes, and so she would tell me. She sometimes deliberately mislead me about what a map was for. So I would be playing on a map and not realize what it was for sometimes. Because I'm a level designer, I'm a map maker. I love doing that stuff. And Pat has delivered by this time these beautiful pixel art tile sets.
Yeah,
and we've got them up still. Apocalyptic Americana. And were we playing Fallout by then?
Yes. So you seem to be forgetting some of this. Let me actually take the ball back from you. I made all the maps for the first game because...
You made the tank because, oh my God, that thing blew me away.
Yeah. So I had been we were playing Fallout on our channel, but we were playing our own version of Fallout with Ackroyd Diesel Age. as the engine. And, you know, I was this Genki vault dweller, very similar to the protagonist of the new, TV show that's out. But yeah, no, and I had constructed a tile set, a pixel art tile set for the purposes of our stream.
Right.
And making this game really look flashy and fun. And I used the Apocalyptic Americana tile set, as it was called then, as well as some of the early assets that I was making for my next tile art stock pack, which became Megacorp's Marines and Monsters, which is specific to the Alien franchise. It's supposed to be generic sci-fi.
How far back do we drill on the Diesel Shot lore and explain this? How uncogent do you want us to get, Craig? Because there's a flow in the story arc that I think I could thread.
Sure, okay, and it'll probably come up, but I want to talk about the mechanics here a little bit. So we've got this brilliant thing where you've tied all of this together. That you built this world based off of polls, and which is pretty incredible. But the idea was, I want to run Alien the game. Nobody at this table wants to play in this world, so I'm going to make a world. Did you play using the rule sets from the game, or did that get warped along the way as well?
So it started with Alien RPG, and I ported all these ideas that came from the world building. I am no mechanics head. I kind of verged on what I was familiar with, which is to say there was a little bit of tweaking to Alien early on, but it was more like in a D&D-ish direction that we ultimately didn't carry forward. Like I had, I'm not going to get into the details, but we had a different
idea of how the species mechanic was going to work, because you're all humans, right? Except for the sense in Alien.
Yeah. So I was giving people bonuses and such, and it was ultimately not what we decided to go forward with, because...
But still die pool, still stress dice, all of that remained?
Yes.
Yeah,
nice. That was very important.
Particularly in that like first outing, there's like not really even a hint of... I think the hint of difference might be like... I think the Mirai even then had anxiety pheromones, I think. Yeah. And we did it almost old school in that I don't think that we gave them bonuses, at least after the first one. We did bans. Like, you couldn't go below this stat, but you could go above on this stat or whatever for individual species. And so the mechanics, it becomes eventually clear that like we would like to go further with change stars. And at some point...
Hold on a second, though, Leland. We're calling it change stars, but I'm getting the impression that's not what this was. It might be what it became, right?
But it was Alien. We were playing Alien RPG in a homebrew setting, is what we were doing.
So the next question for me then, which is the next signpost on our journey, is when do the two of you figure out, shit, we're making a game? We're not just hacking Alien anymore. We're not just creating a world because nobody wanted to play in the world that came in the box. When did the two of you look at each other and go, we're making something?
Far too late in the process is my initial answer.
I don't think we ever had that moment, or at least...
We did?
No, we did, but it was way after we'd already made the game.
It was closer to the Kickstarter than advisable. Let me put that
So what was the inciting incident then, right? So what caused the two of you to realize that this was its own thing?
So the inciting incident, let me work backwards here to see if I can like fight through it in my memory. Over time, I love Alien RPG. I endorse Alien RPG as a system. I have nothing but love for Free League. And we cite them in our intro section saying that Alien RPG by Free League is a great capture of the system. If you've played a lot of people play the cinematic and then they don't. We were constantly coming up with our own stuff. We were playing Alien with all these people, with other people. Eventually, if you play a game that is tight concept, very hard and often, you'll see pressure cracks others will never notice because their time with the game is a box set every 6 months or 2 years. Have you ever played Alien RPG, Craig?
Oh yeah.
How many times have you dropped an item, Craig?
None that I can think of.
Yeah. How many times have you had that result rolled for someone who had nothing to drop?
Oh right, sure.
I've gotten very creative over the years with how I make someone drop items, such as since where everything's bolted onto them, we're like, it falls off your backpack or in your pocket. But at the end of the day, you are trying to make like the stress system that they have is good, but it has certain cracks and an overflow state where it just begins to automatically cancel out your actions. It's gone beyond risk reward and pushing your luck and like success with a twist into this is like very frustrating territory. And it's fine because it's like a death spiral. It's a death spiral game, and that is what they set out to achieve, and they achieve it beautifully.
Correct.
However, there's debate over whether Alien is good for long-term campaign play. We actually had our longest campaign of Change Stars in the Change Stars universe before all of this stuff happens was in the Alien RPG setting. It wasn't streamed or anything. Our friend Madeline ran it, and it was like in this Change Stars universe, right? And as that goes on, we get really high level. Like I become a god. Like I have a person who can like basically you can just keep buying talents and layering on talents. We can do it in Change Star as well. But at some point you become very powerful compared to a default enemy. And if you don't have a trump card style foe like a xenomorph or like a queen, you know what I mean? Or Heaven's Forbidden Empress, right? Like that stuff's gonna I don't know the names of the different forms, but there's one that's basically a rhino. Like those things are going to come in and destroy you.
Yep.
It doesn't matter how good of a human you are. And I love that.
Yep.
But outside of that context, well, the power curve gets wonky and you've like dropped an item 20 times to the point where people just say, forget about it. I don't care about the result anymore.
I think you're getting to a good point there, which is to say we were playing it a lot and we were playing it in a way that was very dissimilar from Alien RPG was intended to be played.
Yeah, there was setting system drift. Yeah,
to the point where we were just like, we should probably make changes to fit what we're actually doing, as opposed to continuing like this.
Yeah, and I mean, as we've already discussed, I can lift a hood and totally rewire something.
Lee just does this. Yeah.
But looking at it, I was like, I feel like we more like need a new model of car. You know what I mean? Like we need a new chassis, and the game is inspired, but it makes several distinct breaks and is unlike Alien RPG and the Free League systems in general in a few ways. So realizing that it's weird to me because most of my games is like a core mechanic and the setting are born simultaneously. But with Change Stars, like the system is born late.
Yeah.
But in many ways it's born as in response to and also as this is more the design tradition I would like to come at Change Stars from, or this is something that I think is going to add meaning in a Change Stars way, or this is how I conceive of our heroes in Change Stars, or how Pat conceives, because it sounds like all Lee, but when I come to Pat and I'm like, so HP hit points across, she's like, yeah, so health should be static per species. And I'm like, but maybe and she's like, nope, every human being should have the exact same number of health. Every rash should have the exact same number of health. We have a 2-tiered hit pool system where like there's stamina and health, and you can get a talent that ups your health by 2. And I'm like, well, what about like the 1 HP mook? Because I'm a huge MCDM guy, particularly at the time. I was all about like, Mr. Colville and his Colvillism. Oh, so I was like, yeah, I love the 4E. I never played 4E, but I love the minion. I love the 1 HP. Can we not? And we wind up packing that into a later game. But Pat pretty firmly was like, no, that's not on Vision. And so that diktat results in Lee building around that reality in a fun way. And this is part of our back and forth, particularly early Change Stars, as I'm like, okay, we have a Change Stars game. Pat, what do you want? And you're like, nah. And like, I don't really do a whole bunch of like, at the time, I have my own game, Red Knight, on deck. I have other games on deck, and I'm not really conceiving of this even as like totally my child. I'm kind of like, I'm the designer. I'm going to help make Change Stars happen. And part of this is why I don't push quite as hard on some of the things that come up. And the game forms a unique identity through it. Because I don't think Change Stars would be Change Stars in the way and extend it is and have the cogency with its message of the world if it was like, oh, this human being has 10 hit points, 10 health, or this guy has 20. He's a really tough dude. You know, he's really been through some things. And I'm like, buddy, if the space harpoon gets through the armor, there's only about so much meat and rib. You know what I mean?
So question for you. Let's imagine a world where I find 2 audio clips.
Yeah.
And I listen to both of them. And both of them are Pat and Leland talking about games and games design. how would I know which one happened before you decided this was going to be a Kickstarting game? And how would I know which one was happening after that? So how did the conversation change when the two of you knew that this was going to be a game you were going to put out? Does that make sense?
That's hard to say. So, like, there were changes chronologically, but I'm trying to think of.
I'm talking about how the two of you talked about it with each other.
How we talked about it.
Right, because it's one thing to be talking about stuff while we're hacking this game, and we just got to get it ready for Friday when everybody gets here. It's another thing to be talking about this game because we're going to kickstart this and we're going to push it out to the world, and people are going to play this game with us not in the room.
Yeah, which is a scary thing and a wonderful thing. I would say that beforehand, I think I'm like taking it a little less seriously, and I'm honestly part of the reason I'm not pushing back at all on some of those points is because I'm just like, yeah, sure, why not? It's a Google Doc. You know, I do think that there was some vague idea we put out eventually, but we've had that about a lot of games, and you know, this is sort of the marquee. In terms of Diesel Shot's partnership, this is the freshman offering of a role-playing game, right? Like, in some ways, you could call Ada the first one, but that's before work with Pat. So I think that the conversation is, I talk about it more as like, this needs to get locked in, and more as like, I'm being more critical. I'm like, does this stand up? And I'm trying to think of it from the perspectives of not even my own perspective, but someone else's, in part because it's going to be at someone else's table. And also in the light, I make a decision that I'm not proud of during this era, where I decide that we're going to use certain verbiage, like creature, to describe various entities. It doesn't even necessarily, it's not the most, I think it's cogent as you read the book, but it's an artifact of other games and their design, in part because we all live with the tyranny of being observed, as various French playwrights would tell you. But as a role-playing game designer, you live with a second tyranny of being observed tertiarily to a primary product in a space. So I had to think about, it's not just putting change stars in front of someone. So I had a very strong ideology. You must write the game for someone's first book. Right. To be Leland's picking up 1889, right? But also, you need to write it so that someone who is a 5e head or is a very casual understanding, or for whom Dungeons and Dragons is the entire genre, needs to come in and not get immediately alienated. But you also kind of need to, if you have something that's named identically, like initiative, it should work basically like it, or have a very obvious red sore spot that like changes it. Part of why people say wound levels instead of health levels, right? You're not like, it's not health, it's a wound. Well, you could say it either way, couldn't you, really? But it's a convention, and it would be it's best for you to get in there early and often on someone to explain that difference, because otherwise they're going to play your game like it's someone else's, trading off of prior information, and get mad when they didn't play the game you designed. They played the game, like 25% of the game you designed and 75% of the game they were imagining based on the last game they played. To clarify, there's nothing wrong with that experientially, and I've done that plenty and had great fun, and it spawned other games. Maybe it's even at the root of like,
you don't write a game for that experience, right?
No, right. Because you want to ideally let them fully come in. And if they want to modify it later and do it, will, it's your game, absolutely. But I should be giving you something that is whole and complete and makes sense to you, and that has some stealing, like a steel man instead of a straw man. Like, I imagine the most rational, good faith, and yet coming at it from the wrong angle person possible, and think, how do I ensure I catch this person? How do I ensure I teach this person? How do I ensure this person doesn't miss a core concept? I'm not going to say I did a great job of it, but after I know it's going to be a Kickstarter, I think about that a lot. And I'm also very obsessed with having all of the rules done. I mean, like, we've been playing pretty much the same game since before the Kickstarter, if I'm honest. But things like, huge things like drone piloting and the spaceship system do not get ironed in until like a year later or more.
I was actually going to...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, as my answer to that, before the Kickstarter, you will hear me say, space combat sucks. After we decide it's going to be a Kickstarter, like a year after, I start saying, our space system's pretty good.
That's cool. That's cool.
I no shade to anyone, but I went around everywhere saying, hey, does anybody like know of like a good spaceship combat system?
We both did this.
Because immediately when I'm like, oh, here's the solution. Make it so that strikecraft are super common in setting, and all the main Cowboy Bebop stroke Firefly ships are flying around with like a small brace of fighters, and we solve all these game design issues, and everything's be on the map, yada yada yada. And Pat's like, no, that's not cogent. And it's not.
The lore tyrant.
It's true. The human empire died 100 years ago, and they were the last people who said, yeah, train up a jockey, feed him, get him good for, 2 decades, and then strap him down to a little rocket, which will take one hit to the engine and kill him, and load him up with several college tuitions worth of missiles and some railguns rounds to boot. And then flood hundreds of them out across space to blacken the skies of your foes. No entity presently operating Orion's arm operates that way. It doesn't make sense. If you see a piranha come at you, I mean, it's dangerous, especially if there are multiple of them. It's a thing that can happen, but it's you're not playing Wing Commander. You're not playing X-Wing.
Right. Yeah.
You're playing Change Stars, and that's not this Change Star story. So I'm like, okay, well, we retreat back from that, and now we're in this quasi position no one wants to be, where you're basically asked to design a board game for your role-playing game, and no one's going to be happy, and lots of people aren't going to want to look up the rules, and then people will tell you, what about Stars Without Number? And I'm like, that's great. So you've turned a single like D&D character into like a Mechazord, but someone gets to pilot the left leg of the Mechazord, and mostly just says, I pass my command point. That is not fun for that person. So all of these high level, I'm sorry, I'm going to the spaceship combat tangent. So many high level things.
We spend so much time
like,
on
where
it.
do you exist on the map? And the answer is on the ship. The map, the ship is the map, even though it's a 2D grid. Sure. You play space engagements on a 2D grid and Change Stars. I send my love and my tears to all those who are breaking a monitor right now. It's how it is.
Yep.
And it has its weaknesses, it has its strengths. And my objective was you needed to be able to play this reasonably by your second session of Change Stars. Nice. Like, let's assume that you and your friends are playing your first ever role playing game as Change Stars. I'm not going to throw you into a spaceship combat. I'm going to let that be session 2. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I want to talk about playtesting a little bit. And I want to talk about playtesting outside of this core group. So it sounds like we have this core group where we saw the play happen, where the game developed and stuff. When did Change Stars go to new tables?
Swiftly. Well,
it was basically the third time we played it was on our channel on Diesel Shot. And instead of this core group, we had a few from the core group in it. But it was mostly just other players that we were playing with at the time. Because Lee and I actually had a pretty big, diverse player pool that we were...
we were doing Alien Summer. We were playing on it. But the thing is, it's still, in a sense, our table. Because there's that other test, which is none of you are in the room. Can people figure it out based on what you have?
And when did that happen?
Yes.
I want to say it happened before the Kickstarter. Did it happen before the Kickstarter, Pat? Or is it...
I think we were having people.
Does Lamp run his first game before or during the Kickstarter? Lamp runs his first game. Lamp and Judge Wolf run their own games during the Kickstarter. And Level 1 Geek, huge shout out to M, who we're still Pat's still doing business with. She's great. What's their project? We'll shout them out. We got to shout out everybody. I'm so sorry, Craig. But point is, we have these we're streamers. We're tabletop people who are out there in the streaming universe. Small streamers know small streamers. It's the best way to grow and collaborate and network. Have other friends right around, right? And some of those people, we get into relationships, and mostly out of like friendship, although they were also a sponsorship arrangement. People play our game on their channels, which means... As long as I bite my tongue, I can observe how they're operating in the room. And one of the things that happens, M, reading the rules as I have written them, sees edge is added to all rolls. And armor roll, and when someone asks, do I roll my edge for my armor in this climactic battle? And she's like, yeah. And someone's like, how does that work? It's like, oh, it's because you're on high alert and you did it. And she gave a reasonable answer. Sure. It's not how it works. I don't say that in the chat. I make a little note. Yeah. And then that's why you'll see that utility role and a role is a distinct concept. Edge is added to all tests. Tests are a subset of role.
We actually got a lot of play testing in just by reaching out to friends in the Twitch sphere.
More of it than should be percentage wise was Pat or I running it on the channel, but other streamers around the Kickstarter era was when we got it. And because Madeline runs for us in the private game, but that's.
But she,
also that that was Alien. Never mind. That's not even Change Stars.
Well, what I want to get a sense of is what was the biggest impact to the final product that came from playtesting, right? So, Leland, you mentioned a crack that you found in the wording about edge and armor and things like that. But looking back on it now, what came out of playtesting that had the largest impact in the final product?
Shout out Quelmar. Every single table that you see in the game is influenced by the Quelmar game's feedback. They did a great feedback session, and we realized something. Hey, I just told you your character has picked up a Terran special. Hey, that guy over there has a Sir pistol. Hey, that guy has a what is he even called? A FAF4. What do any of those words mean, Craig? Can you describe me? Can you show me a picture? No, you fucking couldn't. So there's a table. I'm sorry. Am I supposed to swear on this podcast?
Keep going.
Okay. So there's something that says, like, forgive me for being gauche here, but I'm just going to pull up the Google Doc. It's default name and just name, right? So armor, it says like bulky spacesuit. The default model is a CIS B1 spacesuit. We have a nice little lore entry. I'm like, oh, it's a CIS B1, but what is it? It's a bulky spacesuit. The Pipico Lux Suit 7, it's a luxury spacesuit.
Got it. Barbed
military hardsuit. Military hardsuit. Yep. Ballistic assault plate. Impact vest. So on and so on. And then back to the ranged. What a TS-74 is a revolver. A Sar pistol is it's the laser pistol. What in the fire and forget. It's actually the MFAF-5 missile launcher. My point being, they just point out we didn't know what these names were. Sometimes it would say the word shotgun in there, but so even though it wasn't even technically speaking like a mechanical change, it's such a quality of life change, and also in some ways a quasi-ideological change, because if you think about it, by giving it, here's a default model, but I'm just telling you, and when I write a module or whatever, it's a handgun. It's not a handgun. It's kind of it's a pistol. You have room to imagine a Star Citizen's worth of little bedangly speckled different pistols. They don't all have to be the same manufacturer, make, model. But I can tell you about that one in a lore entry. You'll feel you've gotten the item list gameplay pleasure of reading about the little doodad, and you have the top level mothership module sort of style utility of pistol, number, in a pattern you organize, and I've just inline beamed to your brain what it is, and I reduce to a degree specialized knowledge and a need to reference the book.
So do you know what I hear? I hear you made tables that 1889 Leland would have much preferred to read than before, right? Which was...
Yeah, totally
which
right.
Is cool.
Totally right.
I think that's really, really cool. So, guys, we're going to take another break. When we get back from this break, I'm going to pick their brains. We're going to find out what these two have been grooving on. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's me. I'm interrupting this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it, and I bet you're anxious to hear the rest. But before we jump back, I need a favor. Do you know someone who might enjoy this episode? Can you shoot them a quick message or maybe even send them a link to it? Listeners sharing this podcast was the primary reason we almost doubled our audience last year. Also, would you like to see and hear these games in action? Go to the Third Floor Wars YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Our actual plays combine compelling role-playing, character-driven action, and system tutorials. We create great stories while lifting the hood and showcasing the game mechanics. Links to both are in the show notes. Okay, last thing, and I mean it. Have you rated this podcast on your pod platform yet? Maybe even written a short review? It is a simple way for you to be even more awesome than you already are. Okay, now I'm done. Let's jump back and listen to the rest of this episode.
So this last segment I try to put at the end of every interview because I find it really revealing. Obviously, at the very beginning, we talk about where you guys came from, right? And that gives us incredible insights into how Change Stars became what it is. This end segment is the other bookend, which is we're going to put down the designer stuff. We're going to put down what you guys make, and we're going to talk about what you consume, because I think that's also revealing. And we got a little sense of that when we talked about Alien, the franchise, what a huge impact it had on Pat, and now that then led to really Change Stars being made. good. So let's start off with you, Pat. Is there something recently, a TV show, a movie, a video game, or an RPG that just will not let go of you and just has become a big part of your brain space?
Yeah. Actually, so I'll have to step a few months back to answer this properly, but I was kind of going through a research, like a reinterest in kind of the TV shows I watched in college.
Mm-hmm.
I really started to learn about anime and culture in general in college, and I rewatched Ghost in the Shell.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, huge classic. Yeah. Rewatched Cowboy Bebop, huge classic. Both of those are very inspirational to me. And Aeon Flux, not everybody knows about that.
MTV.
That was an education there. Jaw was hitting the floor routinely. I was like, what the fuck? Yeah. They just did that?
Well, it's incredible when you think about the time that Aeon Flux was made. Like, I remember, I was an MTV kid at that time, right? I think I was in college, high school, college when that came out. I don't remember what years it came out.
That feels like the ideal time to be watching Aeon Flux on
and
TV.
there was a lot of us looking at each other going, did I just see what they just did? Like, we'd never seen anything like it before ever. So you go back, you go back and watch this, and what happens?
I showed it to Lee.
Yeah, we watched it together. And
that's why I was doing it. I had to show it to Lee.
And so it was we watched shows together and we did fun creative bonding and also just like to go to sleep. So
I'll keep going though. So like I was obviously getting back in touch with some of the inspirational pieces that I always loved. But I'm also a huge fan of like various Netflix shows. I've got a deep abiding love for the Cal Arts kind of stuff that they're putting out.
I don't know what that is.
She-Ra actually is Cal Arts.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah. That's it's an abbreviation for California Institute of Arts or something. Okay. It's a very people joke about shows being too Cal Artsy because it's kind of a specific style. It's pretty. Can you give me some touchstones? A Western so animation style.
Yeah, is it like Bob's Burgers, Big Mouth?
Pretty much. I think like a lot of things. Like She-Ra, I think, is a Cal Arts thing.
Yeah, does
and do we like it or we don't like it? That's why I can't get it. Is it an insult or?
I love it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, because I loved the She-Ra, the new She-Ra.
Oh, the new She-Ra is so good. So good.
Yeah.
Pat shared that with me as well.
I thought it was fantastic, and I really loved it because I could watch it with my 10-year-old daughter, and she loved it too, you know?
Yes. So empowering.
You will meet people who use it derisively, in part because it uses a lot of, I'm the least qualified person to say this, but strong symbolization to convey things without having to draw in certain details, and it makes the animation faster and to some aesthetic eyes cleaner, but to those who prefer high detail it lacks.
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure that She-Ra is Cal Arts, but whatever. I love She-Ra, and then one thing that really recently came out, like over the pandemic, Captain Laserhawk Remix.
Oh, I've never heard of this. Tell me about it.
By Adi Shankar.
A Blood Dragon remix. So
there it is.
Have you ever heard of the Far Cry series of video games? Far Cry 3 had a offshoot where it was unrelated to the main game. I think it was just called like Far Cry Blood Dragon, actually, it was its own game. And it was set in like a retro neon 80s. Like everything was neon. There were dinosaurs. There were NES style cutscenes, and it was quite ridiculous. And it was playing it to the hilt. It was kind of like a DeLorean and a series of neon lights fell into a blender with the script of a Schwarzenegger film and played totally to the hilt. And Ubisoft put out Captain Laserhawk, a Blood Dragon remix, which is sort of like their tour de force, or in Ubisoft's case, the tour de France of the all my French speakers are cringing right now. Don't worry, it's a running joke that I'm bad at the language. Basically, all of these properties. I mean, Rayman is there. Rayman is doing cocaine and like punching people because like all of the Ubisoft things are there. Everyone is betraying everyone. No spoilers, but like it. It's not Aeon Flux level because what is, but it is remarkable for a linear narrative, right? without resets, without the Kenny is always dead, always alive. It's progressively like, oh, fuck, they did that. And like, it definitely breaks a lot of bounds and goes to a lot of places that you're not expecting.
Yeah.
And I quite liked it. The only part I didn't like was the, this is a spoiler, but let's just say not everyone makes it to the end of the show. And there's one character in particular who I felt like could have had a longer run, but it's a fun go. And if you're into Beyond Good and Evil, cult classic GameCube game, and you want to see protagonist Jade, right?
Or if you
she's there, as is Sam Fisher, as are a lot of people.
Cool.
Yeah. Or if you just want to see a really cool cyberpunk piece of media. I'm obsessed with the genre. I love cyberpunk, sci-fi, and it is quintessential. It fluidly blends a variety of different animation styles, including fucking pixel art.
No kidding, that's cool.
Scenes. Yeah.
No, yeah. Absolutely. If anybody who's got any sort of retro gaming interest or retro interest in general,
Watch it. Yeah.
So
I'm obsessed.
Easy recommend.
It's inspired my cyberpunk stalker series that I did 2 of,
Nice.
and I'm gonna do like 4 more. I'm just it's so good.
So Pat, as an artist and an animation fan, have you? And I'm trying to remember the full title of it, but I bet you'll know what it is. It's the Netflix. It was something Love and Robots.
Love, Death,
and Robots.
What did you think of that?
Obsessed.
Oh, so good.
Yes.
So good. Yeah.
An amazing anthology
And
series.
so I would imagine for you as an artist, it was so cool because like you had so many different styles that were not only in stories, but in art direction and everything. Pretty damn cool. Pretty damn cool.
I love anthologies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, very, very cool. All right, Leland, your turn. What has gotten into your brain space that you can't let go of?
Yeah. It's fun because like this is sort of an adjacent thing where these are some of the things that Pat shows and shares with me. And I'm going to tell you some things that I show and share with her as I consume them because like we've been living together so long. And sometimes against her will because
Careful.
a lot of them are stories. So I love video essays, and Pat is not a video gamer natively. She's not digital native, actually. She came to technology much later than I did. And I was in like my older siblings, like we catalog ordered and assembled the computers in the house. There's a charming story where I, as a child, explain how to install Silent Hunter via MS-DOS to one of the programmers of Silent Hunter. Nice. So, like I'm in the computers fast, right? Yep. And I love games and video game narratives almost as much as I love tabletop, and I've always wanted to make those games as well. And look out, future on Diesel Shot. But
yeah, wink.
The thing that I consume is video essays about retro RPGs that talk about their story, what they did, like all sorts of things about them that I've never played. Ooh, they're not nostalgia.
Wow.
I've never played these games. I probably never will. Many of them are in formats that like some of them have sections about how to even like play the game on the original hardware. You need to pay hundreds of dollars. And also the emulation was incredibly difficult. Some of these games, particularly The Ring 2, I don't think I could play them if I tried.
So what are you getting from these then? So why the love and why do you enjoy them so much?
So much. I think I started I'd seen a few Deus Ex videos. I love Deus Ex. I've played Deus Ex multiple times. I've seen them. But the analysis and the discussion of it, I'm a theory head. I'm a theory crafter. I love to just get in it. And this is just raw critique, analysis, and discussion and conveyance. It's storytelling. It is critical storytelling because you are having the video essayist tell you the story of the game, and they can summarize the full plot. And as a storyteller and story lover, I want you to tell me a story. And I don't like survival horror games, and I'm not going to go install like a billion things and pay multiple hundreds of dollars to maybe play a game from the 80s. Sure. But I will hear you tell me about it. I mean, like a few hours ago, we were watching the Ultima 4 one and where we learned that Richard Garriott made the 8 virtues, which when I heard of like forever ago, I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty hokey. And I learned that he actually made them after reading all of these world religious texts as a reaction to people ribbing him and being upset and saying that it was like, these video games are immoral. This is satanic bullshit, right? Yeah. And like, it makes me appreciate them more, because I'm like, this honestly comes from a sincere place from this guy, and it feels like it really has a place in the design. I'm not saying that I'm going to go download and play Ultima 4 right now, cards on the table. I'm not. But, you know, the idea that the storyteller asks you a series of questions, and I'm like, I've seen that in Morrowind, but like that determines your class entirely, and you don't even realize it, and because it's all on the virtue, and they don't give you a screen. I'm like, wow. All right.
So, question for you.
Play.
Fair question for you then, Leland. This will be the last question of the interview, which is I give you a magic wand. And you can wave it and play one of those games. So looking at all the video essays that you've watched, and so many of those games that you wouldn't ever be able to come up with the time and money to play. If I could wave a magic wand and put one in front of you right now, which one would you really want to play after learning so much about it?
I'm gonna say the name wrong, or it's not gonna be one of the hard ones. Is this the one that's hard? I don't think that it's. Let me find the eBay price before I give you my answer.
Well, I don't care what the price is, right? What I care about is what inspired you and made you go, you know what? If I had the time and the money, after listening to this video essay, I really would love to actually play this game.
God. I think I'm about to give a very dissatisfying answer here, because I'm trying to think of them, and I don't think I'm pulling anything up, in part because, like, and this is going to sound really bad, and a lot of people are going to be like, take down every actual video play right now. Every Let's Play must die. Because frankly, a lot of them, when they're like a trippy adventure, cyberpunk adventure game, like where they talk about, oh, by the way, all the puzzles sucked. Here's an explanation of how it worked. I'm like, wow. I wouldn't want to play that, but I'm really glad I heard the story of it. But I think Legend, I don't need, this might be a cheat because I don't think I've seen a video essay about it, but I've listened to a podcast series about it. Ooh, wonderful medium. I think Legend of Dragoon, and particularly the magic of what they talk about on Retrograde Amnesia, of like playing it like in the summer around like high school, college, and its transformative nature on role-playing games. If you could send me back in time, if you could have, I think that if Legend of the Dragoon and that arcade shooter to role-playing like mesh milieu could come to me as I was in a vulnerable stage. I've often said this: if the Matt Colville videos about running the game were out when I was a high schooler, I think I would have gotten the hobby sooner, and I do not think I would have been as much of a designer, and I don't think my ideas would go nearly as much against the orthodoxy.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think that would have been an amazing. I think coming to Legend of Dragoon would have been an amazing up ramp. I think it would have shot me into the stars, frankly. And, you know, I don't mean to say Prime is like, oh, it's all in the past. You can't get. I get what you're saying. Yeah. But yeah, I think it would have been a really sick inspiration. I think it would have been a really cool. To not live in settled times is to invite excitement and innovation. And as the invective here in the last question, I incite everyone to unsettle themselves. You know, if you're in doubt, add more soy sauce.
That's fun. So Leland, Pat, on a Tuesday night, there's a lot of episodes of Ian Flux that you could rewatch, and it'd be a lot more interesting than spending 90 minutes with me. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's been a blast, man. I love these.
Yeah, I would disagree with that whole statement. I'm so sorry.
You are
First interview thing that you said wrong.
And for those of you listening, guess what? This is the end. You made it. And I appreciate you doing that. Take care. She creates stock art packs available at Diesel Shot's store for people to have high quality, non-generated. Wow. She creates. Great work. Great work. You guys get it.
This is great.
Yeah. All right.
I'm sorry for butting into your sections, Pat. I was just like, we have to mention the xenomorph and the alien because, like, it's so like.
Oh no, you're good. Like, I was actually gonna interject into yours. It was not necessarily as relevant, but I was just gonna point out, like, it's really just dawning on me now how different our, our history with RPGs is and how we got into it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I actually. Back in my original groups, I was the rules head. Like, I was the one quoting the Dungeon Master's guide, and I'd be like, actually, it's on this page in that chapter. That's where you get the rules on grappling. You know, I wasn't maybe the one person in all of my groups
the rules
who
matter
was
to you.
insisting on using the grappling rules, but
I was much more
totally honest.
Fuck it, we'll do it live, and I cared far more about the rules that I had made, which is perhaps a strength and failing as a designer. Because
it also, and I think we'll get into it, makes you a team, right? Which is the concentric circles. So, all right, I'll bring us back. Great segment, guys. Great segment. What I love to do is I love to learn more about you and your process, and then your game shines through that, which I think is so cool.
Absolutely. I mean, I love.
Yeah, no. You. By the way, obviously you've been giving us feedback, and I do appreciate it. But you are a fantastic interviewer.
You're very kind.
Questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I enjoy it.
Yeah, they're scintillating. You really have a way of leading us into discussion.
Good.
You know?
Leading.
All right, I'll bring us back.
Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over, and you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast, too, while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.